I cannot marry Prince Ease. He is a man I do not love. I am already bound to him by duty, but I can't give him my heart." Omori's words hung in the air like a sharp dagger, piercing through the stillness of the grand hall. Her father, King Obadil, seated upon the towering throne at the far end of the room, froze for a moment. The weight of centuries of royal tradition pressed down on her like a physical force. Every painting, every tapestry, every stone in the grand palace seemed to bear witness to the immense pressure she now faced. Her mother, Queen Kem, sat beside her father, her face a mask of poise, but her hands gripped the arms of her chair with a white-knuckled intensity that betrayed her calm exterior. She had always been the picture of grace and tradition, the perfect embodiment of royal expectations. To her, a marriage to Prince Ease was a dream realized, the marriage that would bind two great families and secure a prosperous future for the kingdom. But to Omori, it was a prison. "Do you not understand what you are saying, Omori?" King Obadil's voice was deep and commanding, yet now it carried a note of disbelief. "Prince Ease is not just a man, he is the future of our kingdom. He is the alliance that will protect us, strengthen our position, and ensure peace with our neighbors. Your marriage is not just about your happiness, it is about the future of every man, woman, and child in this kingdom. Do you think your personal desires outweigh all of this?" Omori felt the weight of his words, but her heart did not falter. She had never been given a choice before, and yet, for the first time in her life, she felt the undeniable urge to make her own decision. "I understand, father," she said, her voice unwavering, though her heart was heavy. "But my life cannot be defined by a choice that was made for me. I was born to wear a crown, but I was not born to be someone else's puppet." Her voice rang out, clear and strong, as she stood tall in front of her father's throne. It felt like the ultimate betrayal to those who had brought her into the world, but something deep within her soul knew that it was time to break free. Time to make her own choices. Queen Kem's face tightened. "You are throwing away everything we've built, Omori. For a whim, for a feeling." Her voice was low but laden with emotion, the kind of emotion that came only from a place of deep love and hurt. "We gave up our lives to ensure this kingdom's greatness, and now you want to turn your back on it. I am your mother, and I want you to understand what you are doing. This is not just about you, Omori." "I know it isn't just about me," Omori whispered, her chest heavy with the weight of her words. "But if I marry Prince Ease, I will never be able to live the life that is truly mine. I will always be bound by chains, and I refuse to live that way." Her father's eyes softened, a flicker of pain crossing his expression. "And if you leave, Omori, what will you have then? A life of exile, of solitude?" Omori hesitated, her gaze briefly flickering to her twin sister, Zoria, who had remained silent until now. Zoria stood by their parents' side, always obedient, always content in the role she had been given. But Zoria's expression was one of concern, of a deep sadness, as she watched her sister prepare to make a decision that would rip the family apart. "I will have my freedom, father. And for the first time, that is all I need." The silence that followed was deafening. Omori had made her choice, and there would be no going back. Omori's decision was not an easy one. As she left the palace gates for the last time, she felt a mix of fear, excitement, and freedom. She was leaving behind the life of luxury and royal privilege, but she was also stepping into the unknown. She rode for hours through dense forests and rugged terrain, her heart pounding in her chest with each mile that took her further from the only life she had known. Her mind swirled with thoughts of her father, her mother, and Zoria. Could she really go through with this? Could she leave everything behind for a man she barely knew? As night began to fall, she stumbled upon a small village nestled by a river. The village was simple, its people humble and hardworking. It was there that Omori met Kofi, a blacksmith who would change her life forever. Kofi was tall, broad-shouldered, with hands rough from years of labor. He worked tirelessly at his forge, his movements graceful despite the intensity of the work. There was something captivating about him, not just his physical strength but the way he spoke, the way his eyes seemed to see straight through her. Omori found herself returning to his forge night after night, seeking solace in the rhythmic clanging of his hammer against metal. She had been running from a life of duty, but Kofi's world was simple, and for the first time in a long time, Omori felt a sense of belonging. What brings a princess to a humble blacksmith's forge? Kofi asked one evening, wiping the sweat from his brow. His voice was warm, teasing, yet somehow respectful. Omori laughed softly. Perhaps it's the peace I find here, in the simplicity of your world. Kofi's smile was genuine, his eyes glinting with curiosity. Peace is hard to come by in this world, but it can be found in the strangest places. And so began the bond between Omori and Kofi, one built on shared moments, quiet conversations, and the growing realization that there was something more between them than just friendship. Kofi, with his rough hands and humble nature, had what Omori had longed for, a life of freedom. And for the first time, Omori felt herself letting go of the responsibilities that had weighed her down. But the more time she spent with Kofi, the more she realized that she had chosen a path that could never be easy. Her family, her kingdom, her royal blood would never let her go so easily. The weight of the kingdom's expectations loomed large, and soon, Omori would be forced to face the consequences of her decision. As the days passed, Omori's love for Kofi deepened, and the connection between them grew stronger. She learned the blacksmith's craft, her hands becoming skilled at shaping metal just as Kofi had taught her. But it was not just the work that drew her in, it was the freedom that came with it. A life where she could make her own choices, live without fear of royal expectations, and build something real. One day, while working on a particularly intricate piece of metalwork, Omori paused and looked up at Kofi, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never knew how much I could love something so simple," she said softly. Kofi looked up from his work and smiled at her. "Simple doesn't mean insignificant, Omori. Sometimes, the simplest things are the ones that matter the most." But as much as Omori had found solace in this new life, a part of her could not escape the pain of leaving behind everything she had known. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, and she began to question the price of her decision. Omori's newfound happiness was short-lived. News arrived that the kingdom was falling apart. Prince Yi's betrayal had fractured the royal alliances, and the kingdom was on the brink of war. Her father, King Obadil, was struggling to maintain control, and the people of the kingdom were calling for Omori's return. For the first time, Omori was faced with a choice she had hoped would never come. Could she go back to the life she had left behind, to fulfill her duties as a princess, or would she stay with Kofi, the man she had come to love? With a heavy heart, Omori returned to the kingdom, determined to face the consequences of her choice. When she arrived, the palace was in ruins, the once grand halls now empty and silent. Her father had lost everything, and the kingdom was in chaos. "I need you, Omori," her father said, his voice hoarse with desperation. "The kingdom needs you. Your choice may be the only thing that can save us." Omori stood before her father, torn between the life she had chosen and the duty she had been born to fulfill. She was no longer the princess who had obeyed blindly. She was a woman who had made her own decisions, a woman who had chosen freedom over duty. "I can't save the kingdom, father," Omori said quietly, "but I can help rebuild it. Not with war, not with alliances, but with the love and strength I have found." Omori stood before the ruins of the royal palace, her heart filled with a sense of purpose. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she would not return to the life that had once been her prison. She would return as a queen, but a queen who ruled not by tradition or duty but by love and wisdom. Kofi stood beside her, his hand firmly clasped in hers. Together, they would rebuild the kingdom. Not with bloodshed and betrayal, but with unity, with strength, and with love. And as Omori looked out at the horizon, she knew that the future was hers to shape, and hers alone. A future built on freedom, love, and the unshakable belief that she had chosen the right path. Omori's return to the kingdom was a quiet affair. She entered the palace gates with a heavy heart, her thoughts swirling. There were no grand welcomes, no celebratory crowds. The palace, once full of life and grandeur, now stood in silent mourning. The once bustling courtyards were eerily quiet, the walls of stone now reflecting the emptiness of the royal family's powerlessness. Omori walked through the halls of the palace, her footsteps echoing loudly in the otherwise still air. The scent of fresh flowers from the garden had long since faded, replaced by the odor of dust and disrepair. Even the tapestries depicting the kingdom's history had begun to fade, the bright colors now dull from years of neglect. "Father," Omori murmured, as she entered the royal chambers. Her father, King Obadil, sat hunched over his desk, papers scattered around him. He appeared older, weary, his once powerful presence diminished by the weight of defeat. His hair, once dark and thick, now grayed at the temples. He had always been a figure of unyielding authority, but now, Omori could see the vulnerability that he had long hidden from the world. "You've returned," he said, lifting his head slowly to look at her. His eyes were clouded with exhaustion, and Omori felt a pang of regret pierce her heart. This was not the man who had raised her with such high expectations. This was a man broken by the weight of his responsibilities. "I've come to help, father," Omori said, stepping closer. "The kingdom may be in chaos, but I am here. I will help you rebuild." Her words were soft, and there was no doubt in her mind that she meant them. But as she said them, she realized the sacrifice she was making. She had chosen Kofi, a man who had shown her a life of simplicity and peace, and yet here she was, stepping back into a world that demanded her complete obedience. King Obadil looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "I don't know how to fix this, Omori. I've spent my whole life building this kingdom, only for it to crumble because of a foolish decision." His voice cracked, and for a moment, the king she had once feared seemed more like a vulnerable father, desperate to make amends. Omori knelt beside him, placing her hand on his. "It's not too late, father. We can rebuild this kingdom. Together." But even as she spoke the words, Omori felt a knot in her stomach. Could she truly rebuild a kingdom built on the same rigid traditions that had forced her to leave in the first place? Could she return to a life of duty, of sacrifice, without losing herself in the process? The days following Omori's return were filled with long meetings and tense discussions. The kingdom was indeed in turmoil. Prince Ease, who had once been a potential ally, had turned on the kingdom, using the chaos to seize power. His betrayal had fractured the alliances her father had worked so hard to maintain, and now, the kingdom was on the brink of civil war. Omori found herself caught between two worlds, the world of royalty, which demanded her loyalty, and the world of freedom, which she had found with Kofi. Her heart was torn. She wanted to help her father, to rebuild what had been lost, but at the same time, she knew that doing so would require her to abandon the life she had built with Kofi. As Omori spent more time in the palace, she realized how far removed she had become from the royal world she had been born into. The court, with its elaborate rituals and political maneuvering, seemed suffocating now. She had spent so many years fighting to break free, and now, here she was, being pulled back into its grasp once more. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with the king's advisors, Omori wandered the palace gardens in search of clarity. The moonlight illuminated the path ahead, casting long shadows on the ground. She walked slowly, her thoughts heavy with the weight of the decisions she had yet to make. "Omori." The voice startled her, and she turned to find Prince Ease standing in the shadows, his figure imposing and cold. "I knew you would come back eventually," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. Omori's heart sank. She had hoped to avoid him, but it seemed that fate had other plans. "I don't want anything to do with you, Prince Ease. Not now, not ever." His expression hardened. "You may not want me, Omori, but you will have to marry me. Your father has already agreed to the alliance. The kingdom needs me to lead. You can either choose to accept your fate, or I will force your hand." Omori's breath quickened, but she stood her ground. "You don't get to choose my fate, Prince Ease. Not anymore." He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You are a fool, Omori. You think you can defy the kingdom's legacy, but the kingdom will never let you go. Your father's choice is final." Omori stood tall, refusing to be intimidated. "No. This is my life, and I will choose how I live it. You do not own me, and you will never own my heart." With a flick of his hand, Prince Ease turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. Omori watched him disappear into the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time, she truly understood the depth of her decision. She could not go back to the life of obligation and duty. She had chosen a path, one that led her toward freedom and love. And that path, no matter how difficult, was the only one worth walking. In the days that followed, Omori's resolve only grew stronger. She spent long hours with her father, trying to find a way to rebuild the kingdom without sacrificing the values she had come to cherish. But the more she tried, the more she realized that the kingdom she was trying to save was not the one she had once known. It was a kingdom stifled by tradition, by a past that was holding it back. Her heart longed for the simplicity and peace she had found with Kofi. She longed for the life they had built together, a life where love and happiness came first. But the kingdom needed her. Her people needed her. The legacy of her ancestors weighed heavily on her shoulders, and King Obadiel, despite his vulnerabilities, made it clear that he could not do this alone. Omori's nights were filled with restless thoughts, torn between her love for Kofi and her duty to her father and the kingdom. She knew that if she stayed, it would mean sacrificing her happiness, her future with Kofi. But if she left, it would mean abandoning her family and the kingdom she had been born to protect. The decision was unbearable. One evening, as she sat alone in the royal gardens, a soft voice broke the silence. "You look lost, Omori." She turned to see Kofi standing at the entrance of the garden, his presence like a breath of fresh air. His eyes were filled with understanding, and his gentle smile eased the tension in her chest. "I am lost, Kofi," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I am torn between two worlds, two lives. I can't find my way forward." Kofi stepped closer, kneeling beside her. "Omori, you don't have to do this alone. We can face whatever comes together. But you have to decide what you want. You can't let duty alone dictate your life." Omori looked at him, her heart aching. "But what about the kingdom? What about my father?" Kofi took her hand, his touch warm and steady. "The kingdom will survive without you, Omori. Your father may be disappointed, but he will understand in time. But if you stay, you will lose yourself. And that, I cannot bear to see." Omori closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words sink deep into her heart. She had already lost so much, but she had found something real, something true, in Kofi's love. That love, she realized, was worth fighting for. Omori's decision was made. She would not return to the life of royal obligation that had once consumed her. She would not marry Prince Ease. She would choose freedom, love, and a life she had built with Kofi. The next day, she spoke to her father. "I can't help you rebuild the kingdom, father," Omori said softly, her heart heavy with sorrow. "But I will always love you. And I will always be here for you, in any way I can. But my life is mine now. I have chosen my own path." King Obadiel's face darkened, but in his eyes, Omori saw a flicker of understanding. "You are truly your mother's daughter," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "But I cannot stop you, Omori. If you are sure of this, then go." Omori stood before the ruins of the royal palace, her gaze fixed on the once grand structure. The stone walls, once gleaming with pride and power, now looked tired and broken. The beautiful gardens were overrun with weeds, and the once vibrant tapestries had faded into shadows of their former selves. The kingdom that she had once known was no more. But in the midst of this destruction, Omori felt a new sense of purpose stirring within her. She was no longer a princess bound by royal duties, she was a woman who had forged her own path, a woman who had chosen love over duty and freedom over tradition. Behind her stood Kofi, his presence a steady anchor. His blacksmithing hands had created beautiful works of art, but it was his love and unwavering support that had given her the courage to leave behind the life that had never truly been hers. Together, they had built a home, a small but vibrant life where love was the foundation of everything. But now, as Omori stood on the precipice of a new future, she knew that rebuilding the kingdom wasn't just about restoring what had been lost. It was about creating something new, something that could reflect the changes she had embraced, something that could reflect the love and unity she had found with Kofi. "We can rebuild this," Omori said softly, more to herself than to Kofi. "We can make this kingdom into something worthy of the people." Kofi stepped forward, his hand finding hers. "Yes, we can. But it will be different this time. We will build from the heart, with love, with respect for each other, and with unity. No more tradition for the sake of tradition. No more shackles." Omori smiled, feeling the weight of the past lift from her shoulders. For the first time, She wasn't carrying the burden of a legacy she had not chosen. This was her legacy. This was a new chapter, one where she could be the leader she wanted to be, not one dictated by the ambitions of her ancestors or the expectations of her family. Together, they walked through the palace ruins, Omori taking in the scope of the destruction that had come to her kingdom. Yet, with each step, she also saw the potential for rebirth. The people of the kingdom were suffering, yes, but they were strong. And with love as their foundation, they could rebuild. As Omori and Kofi made their way to the village square, they were greeted by the sight of the people who had stood by them from the beginning, the villagers who had helped them find their footing, who had shared their resources, and who had never wavered in their support. It was then that Omori understood, the kingdom she had left behind was no longer her concern. This was her kingdom now, one built on the strength of the people, on the resilience of those who chose love and community over power and greed. In the distance, she saw a few familiar faces from the old palace staff who had decided to stay. They were working side by side with the villagers, planting crops, fixing homes, and rebuilding the community. There was no hierarchy here, no royal titles or divisions. It was a community of equals. Omori walked up to them, her voice carrying a sense of purpose. "We will rebuild, together," she said. "This kingdom will be founded not on power, but on love and trust. We will create a future for our children, one that they can build themselves, free of the chains that held us in the past." Her words resonated with the people, and in their faces, Omori saw the spark of hope return. She felt it, too, the hope that had been buried under centuries of tradition and expectation. They could create something better, and it would be a future of their own making, not one dictated by kings and queens. As the days turned to weeks, Omori and Kofi worked tirelessly, side by side with the people, to restore the kingdom. They began with small changes, the introduction of community meetings, where everyone had a say in decisions, where love was valued above all else. They worked to dismantle the old systems of hierarchy, where the royal family sat above all others, and instead created a system where everyone was equally valued. Through these efforts, the people began to heal, and the kingdom slowly but surely began to rebuild. And, as Omori worked alongside Kofi, she found herself leading with compassion, with the understanding that true strength came from unity, not dominance. The months passed, and with each passing day, the kingdom that had once been on the brink of destruction began to rise from the ashes. Omori's vision for a new world, one where love and unity guided their every step, began to take shape. The old palace was no longer a symbol of power. Instead, it became a gathering place for the people, a place of unity where they could come together to discuss their future and celebrate their achievements. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the rebuilt village, Omori stood at the edge of the new palace grounds, looking out over the vast fields. Kofi stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Our future," Kofi said softly, his voice filled with pride, "is just beginning." Omori smiled, feeling a wave of contentment wash over her. She had made the choice to follow her heart, to choose love over duty, and now, she could see the results of that decision. The kingdom was no longer bound by tradition, it was free to create its own path, one where freedom, love, and equality were the guiding principles. "I used to think I had to follow the path laid out for me," Omori said, her voice soft yet filled with resolve. "But I've learned that the only path worth walking is the one I choose for myself. And with you, Kofi, I know I made the right choice." Kofi smiled and kissed her forehead. "Together, we've created something beautiful. We've chosen our future, and it's one we will build with our own hands." As Omori and Kofi looked out at the horizon, the sun rising on a new day, they knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, hardships, and obstacles, but with each other by their side, they knew they could face anything. The kingdom had been reborn, not in the ashes of its former glory, but in the love and unity of its people. And Omori, the queen who had once defied destiny, was now the queen who had chosen to build a future based on her own heart. And for the first time, she could see that the kingdom's true legacy would not be one of old traditions or inherited power, but one of freedom, love, and the unwavering belief that every person, no matter their station, had the right to choose their own path. Years later, Omori stood in the center of the village, watching her people work together to build the next chapter of their kingdom. She had kept her promise, the kingdom was thriving, not because of its royal lineage, but because of its people. Kofi, ever by her side, was teaching their son, Sawyer, the art of blacksmithing, passing down the legacy of creation that had begun with him. Their children grew up knowing that their lives would be built on the same foundation of love and unity that had brought their parents together. As Omori looked at her family, at the life they had built, she knew that she had finally found her place, not as a princess forced to fit into a mold, but as a queen who had chosen her own destiny. The kingdom was not perfect, but it was theirs, a place where love, freedom, and the power to choose could flourish. And as she walked hand in hand with Kofi, Omori knew that they had created a legacy that would outlive them all. Their kingdom, their love, and their freedom would live on for generations to come. Thanks for watching. Please like, share and comment.